Glad to be here, but this is a dismal subject because most people know absolutely nothing about energy. Or they think they know, but they don't, for very simple reasons. Technical education has died in the Western world. How many people study sociology, psychology, social work, economics, business administration? How many people study hard science and engineering? Okay, case made, right? So we have a fundamental problem of scientific illiteracy and deep innumeracy. Billion, million, for most people, oh, pretty much the same thing. They know there is some difference, but they do not realize that the difference of 3 orders of magnitude, okay? Simple things like that. Kindergarten math, we call it. Anyway, I start with a very basic statement, which is at the heart of the advantages and problems we have. We are a fossil fuel civilization. Our material wealth, our quality of life, we owe nearly everything, about 90% plus, to fossil fuels. We started to use them in large amount globally in the second half of 19th century. And by this time, we are now mining every year about 10 billion tons, then to 10 to 9 tons, 10 billion tons of carbon out of the ground. We get it as coal, more than 4 billion tons of coal. We get it as crude oil, more than 4 billion tons of crude oil. We get natural gas, more than 2 trillion cubic meters of natural gas. And of course, we always had other resources, energy resources. Before the fossil fuels came in, we were using biomass. Biomass is still used quite widely in Asia, Latin America. Many people burn wood, many people burn straw, which is even worse. But what we call the primary energy, the energy which is converted into something useful. Right now, as of this year, worldwide, about 81% of all primary energy in this world are fossil fuels. About close to 20% now is something else. That something else is what we call the primary electricity. That is electricity made from hydro, from falling water, from nuclear fission, and of course now also from wind and from solar, and a little bit on geothermal, and a little bit of biofuels, which is the modern form of bioenergy made from corn and soybeans, whatever. But still, a couple of generations ago, it was like 90%, but now it's still 80%. So the 4/5 of all the primary energy which we consume worldwide are fossil fuels. Now, they are great. This is why we rely on them so much, because they move us, they heat us, they produce our food, they transport us around the world, they make all the stuff, they make all the steel and cement and plastics and you name it. But there are great many problems with them. And I would say, right to begin with, forget about global warming. Not forget about it, but even without global warming, even if the combustion of fossil fuels would not generate any CO2, and CO2 would not result, or if they would generate CO2, but CO2 would not result in any global warming, we still wouldn't want to burn fossil fuels in the long run. There are many problems with them. Above all, as I just said, we have to rip up about 10 billion tons of carbon out of the ground every year. That's a large mass of stuff, and it's a dirty business. Coal, crude oil, natural gas is the only clean one, right? Then when we get them out, we have to process them. Coal comes with lots of rocks. We have to sort it, we have to wash it. Crude oil as such, we don't even use it anymore because it's wasteful, and of course, it's much better to refine it. But refining is a very complicated, expensive business. We have to subdivide that crude oil into different fractions: gasoline, kerosene, which you fly, different qualities of fuel, diesel oil, and so on. When we are done with it, we have to distribute it. Pipelines, tankers, and they are prone, of course, to accidents. And of course, when we burn it, suppose we wouldn't generate any CO2, but will still, high temperature combustion, generate nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas which is more than 200 times more powerful greenhouse gas than is carbon dioxide. And then, of course, when there is a little bit of sulfur, and most of the fossil fuels, except for most natural gases, tend to have some sulfur. Coal sometimes have lots of sulfur, 5, even 7%. Crude oil has lots of sulfur. So when you generate that, when you burn that, you generate sulfur dioxide. And sulfur dioxide has been the prime source of acid rain. And we would be in this room in 1984, and you would ask me, what is the number one global environmental problem? The answer would be acid rain. Through the 1970s and 1980s, we thought worldwide there is no greater environmental problem than acid rain, right? Things have changed. Now we think the greatest problem is the global warming. But as I say, once again, you know, even without global warming, you wouldn't want to rely on fossil fuels forever. Useful, great service, but too many problems with them, from extraction to transportation to pollution. But it turns out that replacing these 80% of fossil fuels worldwide, and in some places it's 90%, in some places only 20%, but the global mean is 80%, is a very, very, very difficult business for a variety of reasons. We are so concentrated now. Since 2007, more than 50% of humanity is living in cities. Increasingly, many people live in mega cities, cities of more than 10 million people. I go frequently to Tokyo, it's my favorite city, and Tokyo is the size of Canada, 38 million people. Okay? So we are the second largest country in the world in terms of territory, but we have about as many people as Tokyo. How do you keep people supplied with whatever they need? You know? How do you build the housing? How do you heat it? How do you provide food? How do you provide transportation? All of that, this concentration of people in megacities, 50% plus people in cities, has been achieved by fossil fuels because they have a tremendous, what we call energy density. You burn 1 kilogram of crude oil, and it gives you 42 megajoules, which most people don't relate to. This is the problem, you know, that once you run into the details, you have to have some previous understanding basic. Otherwise, you know, I would lose you in no time. Anyway, they have tremendous energy density. There is too much in very little volume, or very much in little volume. Compared to wood, you can do it in relative terms. You burn a kilo of wood, and that kilo of wood contains only 1/4 of energy, which is contained in a kilo of crude oil, right? So you have to produce 4 times as much wood to get the same amount of energy as in crude oil. They are also very flexible. We can do with them whatever we want. We can fly with them, just put the kerosene into a turbine, into jet engine, and you can fly across the ocean. We can heat with them easily. We can turn them into motion on the railroads or in cars on highways. We can use them to produce metals, steel, copper. And of course, we produce practically all of our food with them. Without fossil fuels, we would not be able to feed 8 billion people on this planet. About half of the people alive today are alive thanks to Haber-Bosch synthesis of ammonia. Ammonia is the nitrogen. We need 3 macronutrients to grow crops: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is needed in by far the largest quantities. Before we had the synthetic fertilizers, all we had to do is just simply to recycle organic waste, manure, human waste. That's not enough. Even if we would recycle every little bit of organic waste, every little bit of animal manure, every little bit of human waste, turn around every little bit of straw into the ground, we would be able, with that nitrogen, feed only 4 billion people. Haber-Bosch synthesis in 1909 invented, 1913 went into practice in Germany first, and now we are producing more than close to 150 million tons of nitrogen, and we apply to fields, and as a result, we have high yields. Used to be that we used to harvest 1 ton of wheat per hectare. Now in the Netherlands, they harvest 10 tons of wheat per hectare. We used to harvest 2 tons of rice in pre-industrial Japan. Now in China, they harvest 6 tons per hectare. So, and all of that ammonia is made, it's NH3, so you need nitrogen. You take nitrogen from the air. This is mostly nitrogen, right? That's not a problem. But you need hydrogen. And we needed hydrogen from methane, from natural gas. That's CH4. We get rid of carbon, and we get that H, combine that H with N, and get NH3, ammonia. We fertilize, and 4 billion people are alive. Now, when you are done with fertilizing, it's not enough. You need to irrigate, right? And of course, if you don't need to irrigate, there's lots of rain, you still need to manage it somehow. And this country, of course, is the best example of how highly intensive it is, because all of you now are aware of Almeria, and Almeria is the perfect example of our high dependence on fossil fuels. Because what is all that plastic made from, right? You can see the satellite image, and there is a sea of plastic covering the whole Almeria Peninsula. All that plastic is made from crude oil and natural gas, right? Inside are these vegetables and fruits, which are heavily fertilized with ammonia, right? And when it's all done, and they are harvested, and they are sorted, they are put on what? They are put on huge trucks, which are powered by what? By large diesel engines, which are burning the fuel made from crude oil. And the diesel trucks take them to Copenhagen and to Helsinki. That trip from Almeria to Copenhagen or Helsinki consumes as much energy as it costs to grow that food with that fertilizer and with that plastic, right? So without fossil fuels, we wouldn't be able to feed ourselves right now. Absolutely essential. So how you get rid of them? Eventually you will, but it will not be an easy journey. And this is the problem which I have with the European Union, namely that they set goals which are not rooted in technical evaluation and appreciation. Now, finally, it's dawning in Brussels. In the last 3 weeks, I've been glad to read many statements saying, you know, we have made these plans without insufficient technical appraisal. You know how it is. One group in EU says 40% renewables by 2030. One says 45. So they split it, and they say 42.5, just like that. Really. I mean, you know, it's like pulling it from the air, really, right? What you should do, you should first do a detailed technical appraisal saying what is possible in year 2023, what amount of energy I will need for it, what materials I will need for it, do I have the labor for it, do I have the capacity in plants to do it, and then set the goal. And not just simply 42.5. Okay. Now, so you would appreciate what are some of these difficulties. I take you through some basic phases of what goes into it. I particularly love solar. Solar is by far the best replacement for fossil fuels. Quiet, no moving parts. Right? Imagine that, right? Internal combustion engine, right? These pistons go up and up, reciprocating motion. It's noisy, smelly. Nothing. It's just quiet, beautiful. You need an inverter, you change the direct current into alternate current, shoop, you put it on the high voltage lines and send it around, right? Good quality photovoltaic cell will last you 10, 15, 20 years, depending how much it is abused by blowing sand and whatever. But, you know, it's durable, it's quiet, it's reliable. It's not terribly efficient. The efficiency may be as low as 7, 8, 9, 10%. They could be as much as 30%. While we have right now gas turbines burning natural gas to generate electricity, which are as much as 65% combined cycle gas and steam turbine, 65% efficient. So, you know, after playing with this for more than 100 years, we got some extremely efficient converters of fossil fuels. These giant diesel engines, which distribute all the, this made in China, all these fruits from Chile to the United States, they are more than 50% efficient. So we've reached some very high efficiency with fossil fuels, not so high with renewable energies. You take the wind turbine, there is no 65% efficient wind turbine, but you know, they are getting better, 40%, whatever. Solar is particularly useful, but solar has what we call the low capacity factor. Number one country with renewables, big country in Europe, is of course Germany. As you know, they this Energiewende, the energy turnaround, and they put more than $500 billion into it in the past 20 years, right? And solar has been a large part of it. The problem is, you've been in Germany, it's not the sunniest place in the world, really, right? I remember many years ago when they called me from New York Times, they said, you know, can you comment about the first big German solar station? I said, I would if I would know where it is. And he said, oh, it's near Nuremberg. Well, I said, I grew up over 100 kilometers away from that place, and as children, we were praying not to have summer vacation because it always rained and was overcast, right? So, you know, and Bayern, Bavaria, Munich, I mean, you know, for those of you who appreciate the climatology of North America, that's like putting solar energy into Washington State, in Seattle, right? That's pretty much the same thing. As a result, to make the long story short, capacity factor of German solar is 11%. So the famous German engineering built something which does not work 89% of the time, right? This is not the smartest engineering, right? You know? Wind is also a problem. If you happen to be Denmark, well, there is this steady wind blowing from the Atlantic, right? But it doesn't blow all the time, but it blows much of the time. So Denmark, 48% of electricity generated from wind. If you happen to be southern Italy, not so much, right? If you happen to be Switzerland, deep valley, alpine valley, not so much. So large parts of the world are not very suited. And this is even when you go onto the coast of Ireland or coast of Germany or coast of Denmark, it's not as good as you go into deep ocean. So this is why now we are building the biggest wind turbines far into the ocean and very tall, so they would catch that wind. But I mentioned a while ago, this is a good place to start, that natural gas turbine, 65% efficient. You can get by the way, don't believe anything I say. Just jot it down and check it, you know, if I'm wrong. Get yourself a Siemens catalog and find a gas turbine. They will sell you a gas turbine. All you have to need, you know, a few $1,000,000 or tens of millions, depending on size. And you see that gas turbine, there's something which is called megawatt. That's million watts. That's the capacity of something to do the work, to use work. So you buy a gas turbine, and you'll see the materials which go into it. And typical gas turbine, depending on the size, gets about 6 to 15 tons per 1 megawatt. So remember, just 6 to 15. Okay? If I want to build a similar size wind turbine, right, and I go to the ocean deep in somewhere out of, so I would get a high wind blowing somewhere in the ocean. So what do I need? I need a massive foundation to put it deep into the ocean, right? What is that foundation? It's concrete, there is cement, and reinforced steel. Then I have to build a massive tower, right, which is what? Which is steel, right? Has to be about 100 meters tall because my blades are 80 meters long, right? So they shouldn't be scraping the ocean, right? What do I put on the top of it? Nacelle, which holds all this gearing and all that permanent magnet to generate electricity. And it holds these giant blades, 60, 70, 80 meters long, right? Now, what is the cement? But the transformation of fossil fuel in these big kilns which rotate, which I am fueling with any kind of dirty substandard fuel, coal, oil type. What is the steel? Well, that's a metal which is now 100% made, new metal, from getting coal, producing coke out of coal, and putting coke and iron ore into blast furnace, right? And melting it together, right? I use the iron ore, say commonly Fe2O3, plus the reductant, my reducing agent is carbon, right? And what is the plastics? What are the plastics? Well, made either from crude oil or from natural gas. So I look at a wind turbine, and what I see is the perfect embodiment of fossil fuels, right? Cement, steel, plastics. And on the average, it comes, remember, the one 6 to 15, tons per megawatt, 200 to 300 to 400 tons per megawatt, okay? So the new renewable energy looks great, but it's extremely material intensive, right? Same this beautiful quiet, which I like so much, photovoltaic cell. In itself, that's not so heavy, right? But I just cannot light somewhere down. I have to put what? Steel structure to mount that stuff on it. And if I go to a very sunny place, well, what are the sunniest places? I mean, there will be no contest. There should have been never any solar plant in Germany. There should have been all solar plants in Algeria or Morocco, right? Okay, or in southern Libya, right? But there is the problem, right? How do I get it? Who is living in southern Libya, right? Who is living in southern Algeria, right? So I have to get the juice. I have to get that electricity to Baden-Württemberg or to Lille or to Zurich, right? How do I do it, right? Well, I have to build high voltage lines. What is a high voltage line? Massive steel pylons and the conductors, which could be made from different metals, either steel or aluminum or copper. So more metal, more metal, more metal, right? So this is the problem with renewables, that they are extremely material intensive. Now, just one more example to drive it really home. Europe is now crazy about electromobility. Everything will be an electric vehicle. That's fine. I mean, I love electric cars. Again, quiet, no emissions. What is not there to like, right? Great acceleration. I'm not one for acceleration, but nothing can beat the electric motor, right? Here is the problem. If you own an internal combustion, if you own an old car, it had only one electric motor just to start a bloody car, right? Before that, we used to crank it up, but that was like 1909, Then Catherine came and invented the electric starter. That's 1913, so we haven't been cranking cars for a while. So, and then came all sorts of other electric motors. Your left window, your right window, your left mirror, your right mirror, right? So there are many cars now, internal combustion car, which have one bigger motor to start a car, and bunch of small motors for all these little things, right? All over, it's about 25 kilo of copper. Just remember, internal combustion, dirty one, ugly car, 25 kilo of copper per car. Electric car, needless to say, is basically an electric motor on wheels, right? So even without any small electric motors for windows and panoramic roof or nonsense like that, you will need 85 kilograms of copper instead of 25 kilograms, right? And don't forget now, in North America now, we don't have cars anymore. I mean, Ford has stopped making cars. We don't have sedans, right? We have SUVs and we have pickup trucks. Number one model in US, number one best-selling car is a Ford F-150, massive pickup truck of 2 tons and a bit. So those will not need 85 kilograms of copper. They'll need more than 100 kilograms of copper, right? Now, let's start doing the math here with big numbers. How many cars do we have worldwide? 1.5 billion. This is a global problem, right? If I replace all the cars in France, that's not going to solve global warming. I have to replace all the cars to get rid of all these CO2 emissions. 1.5 billion. Let's say 100 kilograms per car, 100 kilograms of copper per car, right? Okay, so 1.5 billion, that's 150 million tons of copper, right? 150 million tons. But how do I get that copper? I go somewhere, whatever, Kyrgyzstan, above all to Chile, and I have to mine that copper, okay? I asked this question many, many times, many people, and I never got a correct answer from anybody. Does anybody know what is the average richness of copper ore in Chile, which is traditionally the best mining place for copper? What percentage of copper is in that iron ore? 90, 50, 30, 20, 10, 5? No, 0.67%. So I have to mine 100 units, and out of it, 99.3 units is nothing. It's rock, which I will throw away. But I have to spend energy mining it, drilling for it first, excavating it, loading it on trucks, taking it somewhere else, processing it, getting that 0.67% out and dumping it. Okay? So basically, it's 100-fold. So if I have 1.5 billion cars and I need 150 million tons of copper, multiplied by 100, I will need to mine 15 billion tons of material. 15 billion tons to electrify global cars. And that's just cars. I haven't done anything with airplanes. I haven't done anything with 55,000 ships, right? I haven't done anything with off-road vehicles, because we have many off-road vehicles, not only road vehicles, right? Latest fashion. If I would be in this spot 5 years ago, surely I knew ages ago about heat pump. I mean, that's a kindergarten engineering. But who the hell was talking about heat pump 5 or 10 years ago? Now Europe is all heat pumps. Everything will be heat pump tomorrow, right? Well, if I have a small house in Germany which needs supplementary heating or in summer cooling, well, it's fine. The heat pump is fine, right? How do I will do heat pumping of universities, hospitals, shopping centers, right? That's a very different proposition. Then you have these places like in Copenhagen, in Sweden, Scandinavian folks like that, There is a central power plant which is burning fossil fuel, generating some electricity, and generate lots of steam, and that steam is distributed and heating 50,000 people around it, right? That's the central heating, district heating, right? How will I change it into heat pump by tomorrow, right? It's doable. All these things are doable, but all these things take time, right? And not just simply, 2030, 42.5%, right? That's putting the proverbial cart before the horse. I have to find, do I have enough copper? Do I have enough neodymium? Every one of these permanent magnets in that wind turbine has tens and tens of kilograms of neodymium. All of it comes from China, all of it. China has a lockup on rare earths, neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, right? All of these things go into these new conversions. And China has the near total lockup on that. China has 60% lockup on polysilicon for PV. China has 60% lockup on lithium, and so on, right? So instead of changing our dependence, the bad OPEC, the Arab guys, the ugly ones, they are extorting us. Now we'll be extorting by Communist Party of China, right? As simple as that, really, right? They have a lockup 60, 70, 80%. Now, of course, we can change it, but not overnight. You will not build up a capacity for millions of tons of lithium by next Monday, right? You will not build up a capacity for millions of tons of copper by next Monday, again. So it's a lengthy process. We will get there eventually, but we will not get there by people saying, boom, so much by the year. Now, as for Europe, there was a time when Europe was mighty and mattered. In 1913, European population was close to 20% of global population, about 19%, right? And Europe consumed about 38% of global energy in 1913. And then Europe started to tear itself apart. First war, crisis, second war, Cold War, whatever. Right now, it may come as a shock to you, but Europe doesn't matter. Everything in long run is population, right? Population determines the future of the world, right? 5.5% of the world population is EU. 5.5%. Okay? It's like Nigeria and Bangladesh together, or Nigeria and Brazil. 5.5%, right? Ursula von der Leyen may be traveling to Beijing and telling people in China what to do. 5.5%, really, right? By 2050, Congo, so-called Democratic Republic of Congo, will be bigger than EU. Nigeria will be bigger than EU by 2050, right? Because you know well that Europe is dying, right? From Mazovshe in Poland to La Mancha in Spain, from Irish countryside to Transylvania, every European country is losing population, right? By 2050, it will be about 3.5% of the world population. It will be like Tokyo or something, not quite, I'm exaggerating it just to make the point. So 7.3% as of last year was the global emission of CO2 from Europe, right? So and Europe has reduced these emissions by about 1.2 billion tons over the past 20 years. But so what? China and India have more than made up for it. And this is the global problem. And I will end up by stressing this fundamental thing. This is not like other problems we have, which are global in the sense that they are all over the place, but they could be solved. We had a photochemical smoke. Every city had a problem with cars and photochemical smoke. We got a catalytic converters and we solved it. So I may have Los Angeles got clean first, right? So I can clean up Los Angeles, but still there is lots of photochemical smoke in New Delhi or in Beijing, right? But this is not like that, I can stop burning fossil fuels in the province where I live, or in the whole California, or in the whole EU. But as long as China and India and Congo and Egypt will be pumping more and more, the emissions will be rising every year. And they have been. CO2, there has been no decarbonization, no decline of CO2 emissions on global levels. They go up and up and up, and every year for the past 250 years. With the exception of year 2008, economic crisis, they dip a little bit, but they rapidly recover, which means that the concentration of CO2 in the air go up every year by about 2 parts per million. When we started to measure it in Mauna Loa in 1958, there was 313 parts per million, 0.03%. Now there are 420 parts per million, 0.042%. So they go up relentlessly, and I will end up with few numbers to impress you how far they can go. EU, forget about the number is in gigajoules per year per capita, but EU average is about 135 gigajoules of all primary energy per year per capita, 135. China is already at 110, but still want to grow more. India is at 25. India could quadruple its energy consumption and will not be even where China is today. Sub-Saharan Africa, where 1 billion people, most of the people born in the next 20 years, 1.2 billion people, 1 billion will be born in Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay? They consume less than 15. So Sub-Saharan Africa less than 15, India 25, right? China 110, EU 135, right? So you see the gap there. So to bring India to Chinese level and to bring Africa to Indian level, and believe me, as president of Nigeria said 2 weeks ago, how did they get rich, these Europeans and Americans? By burning fossil fuels. And now they tell us that we shouldn't burn fossil fuels. What else they offer to us? How should we modernize? How should we build our railways, highways, hospitals, sewers with solar electricity? Show us how it's done with solar electricity and we'll do it. That's the fundamental problem we face. There are too many of us, and too many of us don't have too much. And to get at least to some decent level of living, they will burn as much as they can, as fast as they can, no matter what we say. As they say, the US say, ball is in their court, not in ours. 5.5% of global population EU. Thank you.